In the hidden kingdom of Valethorn, where wolves walked as men by day and ran free under the moon by night, there lived a king whose heart had gone quiet with grief. King Draven had once been known for his laughter, his warmth, and the way his eyes softened whenever he looked at his queen. But she had died giving life to their son. And since that day, the king had become a shadow of the man he used to be. He ruled with strength and fairness, but the joy in him had faded like a candle, left too long in the wind. His son, Prince Kael, was 2 years old now, and he was nothing like the calm, gentle child the palace had hoped for. He was wild. He refused to hold his human form for more than a few minutes at a time. He snapped at his caretakers, hid under furniture, and howled through the night as though grief had passed from father to son like a shadow. Nurse after nurse left the nursery in tears, unable to calm him. The palace healers said nothing was wrong with his body. It was his heart that ached, they whispered. He had lost his mother before he ever truly knew her, and grief in a wolf pup could turn into something fierce and untamed if it was not soothed. Far from the golden halls of the palace, in a small village at the edge of the forest, lived a young Omega named Lyra. She was not born into nobility, and she carried no special title. She worked in the village nursery, caring for children whose parents hunted or farmed from morning until night. She had a gift, though she never called it that. When she sang, even the most restless children grew calm. Her voice was soft, warm, and steady, like sunlight falling through leaves. She never thought much of it. To her, it was simply love, given through sound. Word of the wild prince had reached even her quiet village. People spoke of him with pity and a little fear, calling him a cursed child, though no one truly believed such cruel words. Lyra only felt sadness when she heard his story. A motherless pup, alone in a palace full of servants but empty of comfort. She thought of him sometimes at night, wondering what kind of song might soothe a heart so young and so broken. She never expected that thought to matter. But one afternoon, a royal carriage arrived at the village nursery, and a tired-looking steward stepped out, asking for the Omega known for her singing. Lyra's hands trembled, as she was told the king himself had sent for her, hoping she could do what no one else in the palace had managed. She wanted to refuse. She was no healer, no noble, nothing special. But when she thought of the lonely pup crying out in the dark halls of the palace, she found she could not say no. The palace was more beautiful and more frightening than she had imagined. Tall stone towers rose into the sky, and wolves in human form walked the halls with quiet authority. She was led straight to the nursery, where the sound of a young pup's distressed howling echoed down the corridor. Her heart ached before she even opened the door. Inside, she found little Kael in his wolf form, fur bristling, eyes wild, tearing at a cushion in frustration. 2 nursemaids stood back, afraid to approach. Lyra took a slow breath, stepped forward, and knelt down at a careful distance. She did not reach for him. She did not speak commands. She simply began to hum, the same old lullaby her own mother used to sing to her, back when the world felt safer and smaller. The pup froze mid-motion, his ears turned toward her. Slowly, the wildness in his eyes softened into something more like curiosity. Lyra kept humming, her voice low and steady, filling the room with warmth instead of fear. Step by step, Kael crept closer, until at last he pressed his small head against her knee and let out a long, tired sigh. For the first time in nearly a year, the palace nursery fell silent, not from fear, but from peace. News of the miracle spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered about the Omega girl who had calmed the wild prince with nothing but a song. It was not long before King Draven himself heard of it, and though he rarely visited the nursery anymore, curiosity and disbelief pulled him toward the sound of silence, where there had once been chaos. He arrived at the doorway just in time to see his son curled peacefully in the lap of a stranger, sleeping soundly, for what the nurses said was the first time in months without waking in distress. Draven stood frozen, his breath caught in his chest. It was not only the sight of his son at peace that moved him. It was something deeper, something he could not name at first. His wolf, long silent since the loss of his queen, stirred within him like an old fire catching a spark. Lyra looked up and saw the king standing there, and she quickly rose, bowing her head, unsure if she had overstepped. But Draven only shook his head gently and told her to stay seated, not wanting to disturb his son's rest. He watched them both for a long moment, something unfamiliar and warm rising in his chest, something he had almost forgotten how to feel. From that day on, King Draven found reasons to visit the nursery more often. He told himself it was only to check on his son's progress. But each time he saw Lyra there, patient and kind, singing softly or gently coaxing Chaol back into his human form, something inside him settled just a little more. His wolf, restless for so long, seemed calm only in her presence. Lyra, for her part, found herself looking forward to those visits as well, though she tried not to examine the feeling too closely. She told herself it was simply because the king cared for his son, and it was natural for a father to want to be near him during his healing. But she noticed the way Draven's eyes lingered on her sometimes, thoughtful and searching, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle he did not yet understand. Weeks passed, and Chaol grew steadier. He held his human form longer, played more gently, and no longer howled through the night. He began to reach for Lyra the moment she entered the room, calling her by a soft, half-formed word that sounded remarkably like an attempt at "mama." Lyra's heart clenched with emotion each time she heard it, both joyful and afraid of growing too attached to a life that was not truly hers. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the palace towers, Chaol refused to settle for sleep unless Lyra stayed by his side. She sang to him softly, brushing his hair back gently as his eyes grew heavy. She did not notice at first that King Draven stood in the doorway, watching quietly, his expression unreadable in the dim light. When Chaol finally drifted off, Lyra turned to find the king still there, his gaze fixed not on his sleeping son, but on her. The air between them felt different somehow, charged with something neither of them had spoken aloud. She felt her heart quicken, unsure if it was fear or something else entirely. Draven finally spoke, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. He thanked her, not just for calming his son, but for bringing warmth back into halls that had been cold for far too long. Lyra, flustered, told him it was simply her duty, nothing more. But Draven shook his head slowly, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. He admitted, almost hesitantly, that his wolf had been restless since the day he lost his queen, silent and grieving, refusing to settle no matter how he tried to move forward for his son's sake. But since the day Lyra had walked into the nursery, his wolf had grown calm, drawn to her in a way he could not explain through duty or gratitude alone. Lyra's heart pounded as she listened, unsure if she was imagining the meaning behind his words. She reminded him gently that she was only an Omega from a small village, with no title, no standing, nothing to offer a king beyond a song and a steady hand with children. But Draven stepped closer, his expression soft yet certain, and told her that titles meant nothing to a wolf's heart. What mattered was the bond, the quiet pull that had been growing between them since the very first day. He confessed, with a vulnerability she had not expected from a king so often seen as unshakable, that his wolf had chosen her the moment she calmed his son, though it had taken his heart longer to accept what his instincts already knew. He was not asking her to be anything other than herself. He was simply asking her to consider that fate, in its own quiet way, may have brought her to his door, not for his son's sake alone, but for his as well. Lyra felt tears gather in her eyes, unsure how to respond to such an honest confession. She admitted, in a trembling voice, that she too had felt something shift within her since arriving at the palace. A warmth she had tried to convince herself was simply friendship or duty. But she was afraid, she confessed, of hoping for something so far beyond her reach, afraid of being seen as unworthy by a court that valued lineage and status above all else. Draven took her hands gently in his voice firm but gentle, and told her that a king's mate was not chosen by the court, but by the wolf within him, and his wolf had already decided. He asked her not to fear the future, but to walk into it with him, one step at a time, for his sake, for his son's sake, and for her own. The following morning, as the first light of dawn spilled golden over the palace gardens, Draven led Lyra outside, away from the watching eyes of servants and courtiers, to a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree, where he said his parents had once stood together many years ago. There, in the soft light of the rising sun, He knelt before her, not as a king before a subject, but as a wolf before the one his heart had chosen. He spoke the old words, ones rarely used in modern times, promises of loyalty, protection, and devotion that bound a wolf to his mate, not through ceremony alone, but through the quiet truth of the bond between them. Lyra, overwhelmed with emotion, accepted his hand, feeling for the first time that she was not simply an Omega without a place in the world, but someone worthy of love, chosen not for her title, but for her heart. Word spread quickly through the palace and beyond, of the Omega girl who had healed a broken prince with nothing but a song, and in doing so, had healed the heart of a grieving king as well. The court, at first uncertain, soon came to see what Draven had recognized from the very beginning, that Lyra's gentle strength was exactly what the kingdom needed, both in its future queen and in the mother of its young prince. Chaol, now steady and calm, grew into a joyful child who no longer feared the dark or cried through the night. He called Lyra Mama, freely now, without hesitation, and she held that title closer to her heart than any crown ever could. The nursery that had once echoed with cries of distress now filled with laughter, and the palace halls, long cold since the loss of the former queen, slowly warmed again with life. King Draven, once known only for his quiet grief, found himself smiling more freely, his wolf finally at peace, after years of restless silence. He often said, to those close enough to hear, that fate had a strange way of finding exactly what a broken heart needed, sending it in the form of a humble song sung by an Omega who never once sought a crown, only a chance to comfort a lonely child. And so, as the kingdom of Veilthorn welcomed its new Luna, it was not with grand declarations or forced ceremony, but with the quiet, undeniable truth that some bonds are not built through power or position, but through kindness, patience, and the simple, healing magic of a song sung at just the right moment, by just the right heart.